Adey-Jones, welcome to Unbroken.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
Lovely to see you. So tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you found the three principles.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot in one go. Let me think. Okay, well, yeah. Okay, so I grew up in Wales. I now live in California, and I had a very sort of unusual childhood in many ways. What we would classically call dysfunctional, which I basically carried into my adulthood, all the way up until I think I was about almost 50, if I'm honest. And so I very briefly, I grew up in Wales. I was the product of excuse me, a relationship between my mother and my father. He was a married man who lived down the road with his wife and two children, and I was his mistress's daughter. And but I never met him, even though their relationship lasted for about 8 years. I never met my father, and I would pass him in the street, and that really, his avoiding my leaving, looking my direction, never mind exchanging words with me, was really soul destroying for me. I have to say, I really took that as I wasn't good enough to be loved. I thought if I was just, pretty enough, clever enough, skinny enough, anything a 5-year-old normally thinks about, when, when they want their parents' love. But I just blamed myself. I thought there must be something fundamentally wrong with me, that he didn't, I had this illusion that all fathers must love their daughters or children anyway, and that it was my fault that he didn't love me. And also growing up in my household was very hard as well. It was my mother having to make money for us, converted a rambling old mansion into a residential home for people with mental disabilities and disorders. So that was also challenging. so
Yes.
I grew up with a lot of issues, let's put it that way. And I think in an attempt to escape the shame, I had debilitating shame. We were shamed in the community. My mother sent us to a Catholic school because she wanted to, even though she was an atheist, she wanted us to have a good education. And between the nuns and the community and the shaming, I just wanted to get the hell out of England, or Wales rather, as fast as I could. So I sort of via Spain, I spent about a year in Spain, and then I came to the US when I was about 21, and I really felt like I could have a new beginning. I could escape my shame, but unfortunately found a way to sneak in the suitcase with me and followed me all the way here. But I spent years, that's when I first discovered spirituality, and I was on a spiritual path for many, many years. And, self-help, workshops. The first workshop I ever went to was called Healing the Shame That Binds by John Bradshaw. And, that was amazing. And I did a lot of the inner child work and tons of stuff. And it culminated well, not really culminated. I mean, it's on my spiritual journey. I also did a master's in spiritual psychology, which I loved, because I really love the combination of spirituality and psychology. That is my sweet spot. But I still managed to get myself in dysfunctional relationship after dysfunctional relationship. And it was really the last dysfunctional relationship I got out of, which was my marriage. And that was in 2008 that I came across the principles. And there was something in the simplicity of what Sid Banks said that just hit at a deeper level, even though it was nothing new. I'd heard about it for years, as they're saying, all my different sort of, got everything, Kundalini Yoga, Buddhism, Kabbalah. I mean, everything I was just studying. I'd heard of it before. I knew the essence of what he was saying, but it just was sort of in my head, and it wasn't really dropping in. As hard as I tried, I realized you can't pry at that. It's just, it lands when it lands. And as I said, it was this principles that literally knocked me on the head. I was in a bookstore, and this book started sliding out of the bookcase. It was called Stop Thinking, Start Living by Richard Carlston. And it was at a time when I was really probably one of the lowest points in my life, actually, besides when I was a teenager. With all the abuse that went on then. But it was the end of my marriage, and I just, if it wasn't for my two beautiful sons, I was really probably at my lowest point. And I think that's when the opening was there, that little sort of crack open. and I heard something, and I just delved into it, and that was in 2009, and I just
Mhm.
yeah, ever since then, just keep deepening and deepening my understanding. But as I say, I don't throw all the other stuff out either. It all has served me, and I love seeing the commonality in different sort of traditions rather than the differences.
Mhm. Oh, nicely said. Yeah, I love that. And
Mhm.
so in your practice then, leaping to sort of the present day and on your podcast, you tend to focus on relationships. So let's dive in there and say, yeah, let us know what draws you to that focus.
I think sometimes, when people say, I don't know what I want, I always say to them, well, what don't you want? Let's start there. And when they start there, it's really easy. I say, well, then you just want the opposite. I mean, so we tend to really know what we don't want. And
Right.
I think growing up in the environment in which I grew up, it was so painful. And I love my mother dearly. She did the best she could. I absolutely know that. But she also made some really, as a mother myself, I'm like, how could you? What were you thinking? But I realized that I've had the benefit of a lot of, therapy and being on my spiritual path. So I can see how I can do things differently. But it was knowing what I didn't want to continue, knowing what I didn't want to put my children through, knowing, and again, as I say, even with all of this knowing what I wanted, I still was acting out from some habitual behavior that I didn't understand. And I still was attracted to the narcissistic, rejecting, abandoning type man that my father had been. and
Mm.
um, and my mother actually also was also a narcissist. That's how they came together. I knew how to please a person like that, how to keep a person like that. And I think, as I always say, children want a redo. If they've had a bad experience the first time round, we keep drawing in that same type of scenario to redo it, to have a different outcome. And I think, there was that little girl in me that still kept totally, not in my consciousness, but in my subconsciousness, attracted men like my father to have a different outcome. I was attracted to men that were, as I say, narcissistic and rejecting and cruel and punishing. And I wanted to win them over. I wanted
Mhm.
them to notice me and to love me this time. And fortunately, as I say, it took me a long time, but I got to the point where I really realized that everything I was looking, that validation from the outside in, was all within me. And I was just looking in the wrong direction. And
Mm.
once I saw that, I stopped doing what I was doing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
As someone who was familiar with narcissism as well myself and being raised by people with that kind of personality disorder, I noticed too that there's a familiarity in the feeling of rejection. And without really knowing it, I think we can repeat that pattern simply because it's what we know. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I without a doubt, there's a familiarity to it, but I really think above and beyond that, there's that need, as I say, to right the wrong, to to get what we didn't get as a child, to
Mhm.
win this one over this time. I will,
Mhm.
and to also, I think, a lot of people think that only these sort of broken, wounded women get together with narcissistic men. Or broken, wounded men get together with narcissistic women. It's not just men on women. It tends to be more men, unfortunately. But in this culture, we are actually seeing more and more women displaying narcissistic behaviors. It used to be more men. But often too, it's the striving to prove yourself. If you've had a parent that expected perfection, or expected you to never give up. So sometimes women who just, I mean, I know for myself, I wanted to prove myself. Now, if you loved me, I had no time for you. It's like, well, number one, you've got bad taste if you love me. it was like
Right.
that Groucho Marx thing. If anybody want me in their club, I wouldn't want to belong to that club. But the other thing was, to win over somebody that was difficult or challenging or had tons of women, and I mean, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I have to. But there was that thing in me that thought, well, God, if I can win over somebody like that, then I've really proved my worth, rather than just
Mm.
the average Joe.
Mhm.
I've won over somebody that nobody else could win over. That must mean I'm special.
Mm.
It,
Wow. And were you conscious of that thought or
God,
that
no.
belief?
Oh no, not
No.
at all.
Okay.
That's why I can laugh when I look back on it. But no, absolutely not. I mean, it was just this drive that and I think many women have it. I mean, they say, why are women attracted to the bad boy? It's the challenge. It's
Mm.
it's the challenge, and you only seek a challenge when you actually don't really appreciate your worth.
Mhm.
When you're having to validate yourself by an outside challenge, that's really sad. So
Mhm.
I say it, with compassion and love for myself. I mean, and laughter, because I can look back on it now and go, oh my God, you poor thing. But
Mm.
but at the time, no, it was just a drive, and I see now what I was doing. I mean, the types of people I was attracted to now, I see them, from a mile off, and I'd be like, oh no, no, why on earth would I be attracted to that on any
Mhm.
level? So it's almost repulsive to me, but when I was younger, it was attractive to me.
Mhm. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Oh, I love hearing that. Um, and so one of the things I'm really intrigued about in the exploration of the three principles is of course the idea that our experience is coming from the inside out. We live in the world of our thinking, not in the world of our circumstances. And there are people out there who can do us harm, who can behave in a way that is not healthy. So I'd love to explore with you that, what would you call it, dividing line, that place of being where we take responsibility for the thinking that's going on within us and we have clear boundaries. So
Yeah.
could you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, this is a fascinating one for me. I'd probably half my clients come through me through the three principles, world of the three principles, and the other half don't. And I actually find that the people that have an understanding of the principles are often more challenging to work with than with the people that don't. And the reason I say that is because they keep going, and it's ironic because they keep saying, they keep going into their intellect. I mean, because Sid said, follow the
Mhm.
feeling. But they keep popping into their intellect and trying to intellectualize their situation and say, well, it's just my thinking. And, I'm just making more of this than is really there. And I see his psychological innocence, and it's fine. And I just, to try and have somebody appreciate that we are both spiritual and human rolled into one. We're not separate. We are a spiritual being having a human experience. And there's a reason we came onto this earth, to experience our humanity. And I am not into the spiritual bypass at all. And so, what I always say is, know yourself, really know yourself.
Mm.
Because I, you know, I used to, I can look at my behavior now, or rather my feelings, and I can separate out from my wisdom and my feelings what's an old habitual pattern that I have from childhood that developed out of a need to protect myself. I can recognize that when that's happening, separate from, I know myself. Like I say, I understand what's going on within me, and I go, oh, this is just some old stuff happening. This is not the other person. This is just me, like creating a story because maybe I'm fearful or I'm feeling vulnerable right now. So I'm seeing this person as a threat, and I know it. I know it inside me. But there's times when I really do know, oh, this person is, as much as I can see their psychological innocence, and they're all, we're all connected and all that stuff, their behavior in the world of form is not healthy, and it's having a negative impact on me. And I can lovingly separate from them I don't have to hate them. I don't have to judge them. I don't have to belittle them or beat them up. I can just remove myself and say, this is not a healthy environment to be in.
Mhm.
And it's a very different, and I always say to people, really trust your wisdom. Your wisdom will guide you. It'll let you know when you're, as I say, in that habitual pattern and of, because I can see in some of my previous relationships where I really did blame the other person for things that were going on in my head, you know. and, and I apologize to you out there that I did that too. But, I had I have in the world of psychology, we call it a dysfunction. I mean, a disorganized attachment style. So I can be a little push me, pull me, like I want to be close and then I panic and I pull away. What's the easiest way to pull away is to find fault with the other person. But what I'm doing is actually just giving myself some breathing space. So I know
Mm.
that about myself. So instead of being hypercritical and finding a reason why I need to pull back, I go, this is just who I am. And every now and again, I just need a bit of distance. And I can articulate that to my partner of the last 13 and a half years in a wonderfully mature way, as opposed to, you did this, and this is why I'm rejecting you right now.
Mhm.
But if there were behaviors, thank goodness he doesn't. He's an incredible, beautiful human being. But if there were some behaviors that were unhealthy, um, I would be able to say, that's not a behavior that works in my relationship, and address it.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, it did, and it's brought up a couple more follow-up questions, so this is great. Um, One of the things you said was that you've learned to discern between old patterns of thinking and behavior and wisdom, your internal wisdom. So could you, and it may not be easy to do this, could you tell us how you learned to do that?
Um, Trusting, that's the other thing I want to talk about. When we grew up in a dysfunctional environment, I don't know about you, but for me, um, my wisdom would tell me something which I would then share with my mother, and she would say, "Don't be ridiculous. That's not true." Or simple as, "Why doesn't my father come and visit me?" Well, your father loves you. Well, why doesn't he come and visit me? Why doesn't he come earlier when I'm awake? Or why doesn't he look at me when I pass him in the street? Well, he loves you. He just can't be with you. And so I was getting mixed messages because my wisdom was telling me that's not love. That's
Mm-hmm.
not love. But the more, and then, if an adult behaved inappropriately with me, which they did, I would say to my mother, this doesn't feel right. This has happened. And she'd say, don't be silly. He doesn't mean it that way. Let him touch you, whatever, stroke you or whatever it was. And so again, it's that, so that shoving down of your wisdom, your intuition, that voice inside that says this is not okay, this is, so you end up, you can never get disconnected from it, but you end up not listening to it anymore. Because as a small child, who are you going to believe more than, I'm going to believe my wisdom over my mother, who I depend on for my life. You're going to believe the parent. So you stop listening to your wisdom. And that is one of the hardest things I find with my clients, is helping them to hear their wisdom again. Never went anywhere, it's always there, but it was just being ignored. And we were listening to the thoughts in our head, which were often, sort of the repeating of what our parents said. It's the dialogue. So we often sort of listen to that over our wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So, like things like, as a small child, if we know something's icky, it's icky. Well, as an adult, if you've been abused as a child and you've learned to squish that down, sometimes that, again, your head will come in and say, oh, that's not abusive behavior. That's fine. And we're disassociating. We're just like this sort of, head making decisions for us. And we're not connected to our body. We're not connected to our wisdom, not connected to our feelings that are telling us this is not right. So that's one thing, is to really start to, and again, as I said, if we're listening to the thinking in our head, the personal thinking, it's often overrides or tries to override what our intuition is telling us. Now, if we can recognize, hang on a minute, that's my mother's voice in my head, or my whoever's voice in my head. That's not the truth. That wasn't the truth I felt. what did I feel when that happened? And learn to differentiate between that chatter, that noise in the head that's always trying to rationalize and make sense of things and make things, all right. We often, like, our head wants to keep things as they are. We don't want to rock the boat, so we minimize and rationalize things. Whereas our wisdom is guiding us to say, this isn't right. Trust us, be brave, walk away. Life will be better.
Mhm. And you bring up such an important point, that wisdom has always been there. It will always be there. It'll never leave us.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important to remember. And for me, that looked like a bit of slowing down.
Mm.
So a bit of, I have experienced a lot of urgency, anxiety in the form of urgency. And so that would make me hear the chatter in my head and then just kind of obey it automatically. And so for me, one of the elements of learning to trust wisdom was slowing down a little bit and just saying, wait a second, I can take a minute and feel things and, see where I'm at.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah.
totally agree. Absolutely. There is no urgency. Wisdom is not in a hurry, you know.
Right, right.
It's not on the clock. Get me
Yes.
or I'm leaving, act on what I've said now, or I'm never going to help you again. It doesn't do
Yes.
that. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, take the time. And and I mean, I don't necessarily practice meditation as much as I used to, but it is taking that time, that dropping in, that really, the letting things get quiet, letting that. And sometimes it's really loud. Sometimes it's, as I shared recently on this talk I just gave, my wisdom to get out of my marriage was, it was on Valentine's Day. Last thing I thought I wanted to do was get a divorce on Valentine's Day. I mean, my heart was broken. I discovered some really painful truths about my marriage, but I was sitting meditating, and this voice inside me just said, "Get out now before he kills you." And I was like, where did that voice come from? I was like, because my head was, codependent. I was looking at all the reasons why I should stay, how I didn't want to break up my family unit, that I felt that I had given my children what I hadn't had as a child. I didn't want to, repeat my childhood and have a broken home, but it was not a healthy relationship, and I needed to get out. And
Mm,
it wasn't physically abusive, I will definitely say that, but the emotional abuse, is, I think, can be equally damaging. I work with people who have sworn off ever being in a relationship again after being in a narcissistic relationship, and that to me is such a shame. I mean, we are these beautiful loving creatures that are meant to love and have open hearts and be with other humans, and to be that shaken to the core that you would never take that risk again, is sad to me. I mean,
mhm,
fortunately, the people I work with, I think I give them enough, they're armed with enough information that they're not afraid to do that again. They
mhm,
won't, they know they will not make that same mistake again. They'll know how to
mm,
use their wisdom. They'll know how to recognize those red flags. And they won't go into that overdrive of the personal mind, rationalizing and minimizing because they want what they want, you know.
mhm. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And um, one of the things that occurred to me when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about was that when we're raised in dysfunctional households, like you and I both were, we I notice a sense in myself of taking a lot of responsibility for stuff that isn't mine. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to explore that a little bit with you and see what you had to say about relationship, that aspect of relationships.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, I would totally recognize that one.
Mm,
And sometimes it's, again, it's that training. It's like, if I just say sorry, everything will calm down and be nice. So I'll just say sorry to make everything nice again. Sometimes it's that people pleaser coming out of us. And sometimes it really is that unhealthy boundaries that, if we grow up in a dysfunctional environment, healthy boundaries were not modeled for us. And there's all that enmeshment and you made me do it, and all of that stuff that goes on. And I think, once we, again, one of the things I learned about the principles was that that's separate realities. And I always use my snow globe. But just
Mm,
seeing that we are all, it's my little Buddha, that's my center, my spiritual center. But just know that we all live in these little globes of our thinking. And, there isn't that, as you mentioned earlier, there's not that reality out there that we're all looking at. All our perceptions of reality are different depending upon our thinking. And so I think when somebody is, say, they're upset and angry and hostile or whatever, I used to go, ooh, because I couldn't deal with their upset. So I would try and calm them down and control it and everything. And the only reason I was doing that, it looked like I was doing it for their sake, and I wasn't. I was doing it for my own sake because I was uncomfortable
yeah.
with that aggression, that whatever it was. And instead of having, the sense to remove myself and say, hey, I don't have to put up with this, I thought I could control it and behave in a certain way to manipulate it. And recognizing that, we're not God. And they're going through their experience because that's what they need to go through for whatever reason. And we can just stand back. And again, if it's not an abusive relationship, it's simply that somebody's out of sorts, the more that we can stay centered and grounded and let them have their experience, not react to it, not control it, the quicker they calm down and they're back to their beautiful, loving, normal self. But when we are in a dysfunctional relationship, again, instead of just standing here and being contained and saying, oof, this is too much for me, I'm removing myself, we again, as I say, try and control it. And neither way is that's not healthy. We have to respect that that person has everything inside of themselves to bring themselves back down to that sort of well-being that's within all of us. And if they don't, then again, remove yourself. We don't need to fix anybody. Our job is to be the best guardian of our own lives. I mean, that's very, I always say too, when we give our heart to another person and make them responsible for our heart, and then we're like, what do you mean you shouldn't have that hurt me, you shouldn't have done that, we're setting other people up. We are the best guardians of our lives and our hearts. Doesn't mean that we don't share our hearts openly and willingly with another person, but we don't make the other person responsible for us, and vice versa, we're not responsible for the other person. I know that sounds hard. That's not meant to sound hard. But it's just, I mean, I'm a mother. I mean, I care dearly for my children. I mean, if I'm really honest, they always come first. but I have to remind myself, I am, I'm responsible for me. Nobody will take as good care of me as I know. I know my needs and my wants. It's not up to somebody else to guess what I want and need and then be wrong or bad for it if they don't get it right, So we have to sort of take care of ourselves, communicate clearly and honestly, and as you said, just take care of our side of the street, and water finds its own level. And the healthier that you are, the more that you will attract healthy partners. I always say that, if you're attracting a narcissist into your life, it's because you lack, because narcissists have all that entitlement and self and everything. And then when we're codependent, we're all the way down here and we've got no sense of self and no entitlement. So we're obviously the absolute perfect fit for them because they want everything their way. Now, if we raise our level of entitlement and are healthy, the narcissist is going to go, hang on a minute, I can sort of have a fight with this person, or I could bypass them and go for somebody that's got low self-esteem, will always put me first, and I can manipulate and control.
Yeah.
So the best way is to just raise your healthy level of, I call it entitlement, entitled to be treated with dignity and respect. So just raise that, and then you will get a partner that will match you on that level.
Oh, lovely. Oh, that's really nice. One of the things we mentioned briefly was your podcast, and it's called Relationship Mastery, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about that, about your co-host and what you talk about on that show.
Okay, great. Yeah, my co-host is Barry Selby, and he is a dating coach, primarily relationship dating coach. And I first wanted to do, I did all my insightful conversations and interviewed fabulous 3P people such as yourself and all the other amazing 3P people. And I sort of started to find that I was running out of people to interview, and it run its course. It was, I think I'd got about 120 episodes, and it was great, and I really loved it. But I wanted to focus more on what I do, which is work with people around relationships, especially overcoming dysfunctional childhood, trauma, codependency, and narcissistic abuse and shame. That's my category in, and I wanted to focus more on that. I also, really honestly, didn't want to have to go through all the gathering guests again and organizing that. And I felt that it's more interesting to have two different perspectives about things. And Barry and I both went to the University of Santa Monica. We both got our masters in spiritual psychology. But he is a single man, never been married, doesn't have children, and isn't in a relationship right now. So we were really different. And I thought this could be interesting because we're going to have, so we both happen to be British. That's the only
Oh,
commonality we have, and USM. But we bring two different perspectives. I mean, there's moments on the show where I can just feel myself going, no, Barry, I do not agree with you. He can sometimes talk about the male role and the feminine, and I'm very much into that. We both have feminine, masculine within us, and there's, depending on who I'm interacting with, I can be incredibly feminine, and I can also be incredibly masculine. I can see both in me very, very clearly. But yeah, it's a great show. We cover all different topics, anything to do with any type of relationship. Not just, I mean, parenting, how to deal with your coworkers, your boss, boundaries, I mean, apologies, taking responsibility, and life in general. I really like to come from the spiritual perspective and share my spiritual understanding as it is, which, as I say, is an amalgamation of many different disciplines that I've studied over the years. So.
hmm. Oh, nice. And that show is available on all the usual
Yeah,
podcast apps
yeah,
and people can find it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Apple, everything, all the platforms, and it's also, we have a YouTube, a private Facebook group as well,
Oh,
by the same
nice.
name, that people can join and see all the episodes on there. So,
Yeah.
and YouTube as well, because it's either visual or I like to watch rather than just listen personally. I know
Yes.
people like to sort of do their podcast in the car or on their walks, but I actually like to watch YouTube and see the interaction between people.
Yes. Yeah. It's surprising. Yeah. This show goes out on YouTube as well. And I'm always surprised how many views it gets, but that's clearly a preference for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we're getting close to the end of our time together, is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to share today?
Hmm. Well, I think we touched on it, but I would like to go back over it because I think it's so important. And again, as I said, I firmly believe that there is no real healing unless we look at both our spiritual essence and our humanity. I think they dovetail beautifully together. I think that, as I said, we've got plenty of time to be spiritual, 100% spiritual once we're dead. But while on this earth, we are, we're human, and we have very predictable ways of behaving. Our psychology is quite predictable, and I find it fascinating. And I think that when some people say, oh, I don't want to go and look at my childhood, but to me, it's like it's like being a surgeon. Sometimes we just have to see where the old habitual thinking or the dysfunction is, so we can pluck it out and start to heal. And the healing is when we don't just identify with our humanity, when we see who we are as these incredible spiritual beings that are infinite potential. We're not these stories that our psychology has told us about ourselves, that we really have the power to be anything that we set our minds to. But I do think it's very important to understand where the thinking originated, because it's easier then to say, oh, I'm onto you. I know where, as a small child, I thought you were going to help me. And you did maybe help me back then, but you're not serving me any longer. But thank you. Thank you for popping up again and thinking that you're doing a good job. But now I'm an adult and I don't need to protect myself with this way of thinking or behaving. Served me back then, but no longer. And we can let it go with like a sense of humor and with an ease, and we get it. I mean, I catch myself throughout the day slipping into that old sort of thinking that doesn't serve me. And but I hear it and I go, you're back again. It's like, God, old familiar friend, you just keep showing up. But it's the getting it and the seeing it. I'm never frustrated. I never think, why are you still here? You should have gone by now. I have none of that thinking. I'm just like, oh, I just recognize you sooner. I got you. And then I get back to being who I really am at my essence, which is, as I say, anything I really want to put my mind to.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yes.
probably the most important thing. And again, it's just one without the other. I think psychology without spirituality can only take you so far. It only took me so far. And I loved, my time in therapy. It helped me make sense of my chaotic childhood and some of the patterns I was in, etc., and my studying of psychology. But without that spiritual component, to know that we are these so much more than just our psychology, I just don't think we can really heal. So to me, it's both. They
Mm-hmm.
dovetail.
Yes. Yes. Lovely. So where can we find out more about you and your work, Del?
You can find me everywhere. You can find me, you can find me on that podcast, Relationship Mastery. You can find me at deladeyjones.com, which is my website, and you can find me on YouTube. I'm starting to do a lot more speaking engagements, so yeah, everything is on the website. If you go to the website, it directs you to me and everything that I do, some old blogs of mine, and yeah, and the old shows, anybody still interested in really listening to some of the most incredible teachers we have in the three principles, from, Dick and Bettinger, Elsie, the Pranskys, just amazing people. I've interviewed them all, so that all the old episodes of insightful conversations are available on my website too, or on my
Oh,
YouTube.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that's good to know. Okay. And so I'll put links in the show notes at unbrokenpodcast.com, and so people can find that.
Okay, great, wonderful, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for being with me here today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure, and it's great to be on the other side, because that's right. So anybody listening that wants to listen to my amazing interview with Alexandra, then please go and listen to it. It was fascinating. I think we definitely had some interesting commonalities between us in our life. So
For sure. Yeah. And I think we mostly talked about my memoir, my cult memoir on that
we
show.
did.
Yeah.
As we were talking, I remember saying, "Oh my goodness, this being in a cult is like being in a relationship with a narcissist." Well,
Yes.
most cult leaders are narcissists, if not psychopaths.
That's
So,
right.
but it has very similar. It's that over time, nobody puts their hand up and says, "Hey, I want to be in an abusive relationship," or "I want to be in a cult." It's that over time, that seduction and pulling you in gradually, the love bombing. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Such a good point. All right. Well, thanks so much, Del. Take care.
All right, and you too, thank you. It was
Bye
wonderful.
bye.